Okay, welcome to this tutorial about using labels in Sysrev. In this video, we'll cover using the different types of labels in Sysrev, mainly Boolean, categorical, and string labels. Sysrev labeling is really the key feature that allows you to do your screening and categorization of the records in your Lit Review project. Labeling can be done by multiple reviewers independently. And it can also be done automatically using the auto label feature, which is covered elsewhere. The three main types of labels in Sysrev, as I mentioned, are Boolean, categorical, and string. There's also an annotation label, which we won't cover in this video. Let's see some examples of how each of these might work in our example project here on wildfire impacts. So to get to the label setup area in Sysrev, you go to Manage from your overview page and Label Definitions. And here you can view the current labels that might be already in your project. If you click on these, you can make edits to those labels. You can also disable a label if you're not going to use it in a particular workflow. So for example, I actually might go ahead and turn off this annotation label for the moment. And we'll go ahead and leave this label here for now. So you can see down here all of the different kinds of labels. Again, we're going to focus in this video on Boolean, categorical, and string. There's also a more complex label called group labels that's covered in another video. And like I said, annotation labels, which we won't cover here, but possibly in a later video. There's something called a relationship label, which is actually not currently an active label type, so no need to explore this. And then this just allows you to import labels from other projects, which again, we won't cover that in this video either. So let's create a new Boolean label. Boolean labels are used for basically simple yes or no questions. So for example, in this case, we might want to know if the item in our project is a review article or not a review article. So this particular project, we're looking specifically for review articles on wildfire impacts. So we're going to go ahead and name this, and we'll just give it a simple name. This will be sort of the article label name. And here we provide a question. This is the text that will appear when a reviewer hovers over this label to sort of see more details about what this label means. So in this case, we'll simply say, is this article a review? Again, this is going to be yes or no, by nature of it being a Boolean label. We can do different settings, like we can require an answer so that the reviewer needs to make an answer to this question or use this label before moving on to the next record. Requiring user consensus will flag conflicts when two reviewers are not agreeing on the answer to this label, so you can choose that here or not. Inclusion criteria will basically says that if this label is a certain answer, it needs to comply with the decision about whether or not an article is relevant. So in other words, if a reviewer chooses this article as, yes, it is relevant, but then chooses in this case, let's say it's not a review article, and one of our criteria for relevance is a review article, that will be sort of flagged during the review process. We can also hide the label if we don't want reviewers to see it for a given workflow. And we can turn this on or off for auto label extraction, which is something that's covered elsewhere. The default is that it will be turned on. I'm actually going to turn it off in this case. So we can go ahead and just save this as a simple Boolean yes, no. And then let's set up another label. Let's set up a categorical label. So categorical labels are labels where there might be any number of answers to a question, but we want reviewers to be consistent and to choose the answer from a list. So for example, maybe we want to know whether the study covered health, environmental, or economic impacts. So I'm just going to call this impact type impact is addressed in this review. And our categories or our selection options are here, and we can add as many as we need with a comma separation. So in this case, we'll say health, economic, environmental. So we could also here do none, or we could also do multiple. But actually, I'm going to go ahead and make use of this allow multiple values option where reviewers can actually choose more than one value. So that way I don't really need to include a multiple option because if they choose multiple values, I know there's multiple impacts covered. So again, I'm going to turn off the auto label extraction and save this label. Okay, finally, let's look at string labels. String labels allow a reviewer to type in an answer without any constraints. That said, you can add certain constraints, which we'll show here in a moment. So in this case, for example, let's say we want the reviewer to provide more detail about the types of impacts covered in the review. So let's just call this impact details. Can say provide more information about the specific impacts addressed in this review. And here we'll just have the reviewer type as many words as they'd like into this field to describe the impacts that are covered. They can also copy and paste text from the abstracts. So we can actually set some constraints on this. We can actually set a length constraint. So in this case, this is 100 characters. We can also use regular expressions if we want, for example, this to adhere to, say, a date format or a certain number format. We can use that here as an optional feature. We can also provide examples to sort of prompt the reviewer to answer in a certain way or format. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and leave these blank. And we are going to, again, turn off the auto label extraction. I'll not go into the details about these different options in this video here, but for now, we'll save this. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what these look like in the reviewing process. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this older label that I had made just so we don't see that when we review. So we're going to see basically these 4 labels, whether or not we should include the record. It's kind of a default label that's generally going to be visible in any review process. And then our custom labels, so whether or not it's a review article, the impact type, and impact details. We can reorder these if we like, if we want them to appear in a different order when the reviewer does their reviewing. And we can also view active or all, including the disabled labels that we've maybe made in the past and then are not using. Okay, so we'll review by going over to the Review tab. We are given a record, and you can see the labels show up here in the left-hand panel. Again, if it's required, it will tell us it's a required label. In this case, the only label we're requiring is a yes or no decision on whether the article is relevant. In this case, we'll say, looks like this one might actually not be relevant because it does not look like a review article. I'm actually going to say no. So in this case, I'm not going to even extract this information because really, because it's not relevant, it's not something I want to look at further. So I'm going to go ahead and say save to that one. Now this one is looks to be related to climate change, possibly including wildfire. patterns in the context of forests, and it is a systematic review. So I'm going to go ahead and include this. And it's a review article, so I'm going to say yes. The impact type, let's see. Looks like this is sort of a social human kind of impact study, but we're going to say we probably should have included social here as an option, but I'm going to go ahead and say let's just say this is a health impact review, and I might go ahead and pull out some text, or I can just type into this field. Either way, I can add whatever I want to this particular label. Once I'm done with these, I can go ahead and click save. And again, I just fed up the next review in the list. So that's how labels work. Again, this focused on Boolean, categorical, and string labels. There are other label types that are featured in Sysrev that are covered elsewhere in another video or in the Sysrev guide.